There's not a lot that can cure savages of people's emotions quite like Rebecca De Winter and Mrs. Danny Danvers. They exist to mess with people who don't really deserve it. Maybe they could run for president one day. But if we're ever going to reach people like that on a level they can relate to, it just might be lavishing goodness on their taste buds and in their bellies. Who doesn't like to feel they just had a tremendous beverage go into their mouth? Even these bad people. Well, the good folks at Sparkplug Coffee are ready, willing, and oh so able to help men jerks such as these by offering premium quality coffee beans. Sparkplug stuff is convenient, and premium or not, it's very affordable. With Sparkplug, you'll be brewing with the best. And you don't have to have the kind of money where you can own an enormous mansion in the country to get some of it. Now, Englanders can't get in on this anyway because Europe is too far away to make it fiscally responsible to sell to them, but Canadians and Americans will get orders shipped to their door within 1 week. Hey Canadians, this just gets better. You're not going to have to pay for the delivery costs. Oh, and I shouldn't neglect to suggest you join the Autopilot Coffee Club. You can pause or cancel any time, especially if your housekeeper is a nut who's so obsessed with her dead boss that she wants her current boss to kill herself. When that's going on, maybe you'll want to pause your mail orders. Insanity like that aside, you're going to be itching to find your new favorite, so go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES and give it a try. Our HYES promo code will get you a one-time 20% discount. All right, we're in for a gothic thriller today. Gothic thriller? Let's find out what's going on here. Bev, cue 'em.
And action! Have you ever seen
Rebecca? Hello, one and all, and happy Oscar month here on Have You Ever Seen? Every year since 2016, we've been reviewing films that won Academy Awards, whether it be 1 or 2 or 12 or not 12. What is it again? 13? 11?
I think it's
11, maybe. Last night was the Oscars. We intend to put up an Oscars post-view show at some point on Monday, though, so tune in to hear that episode. Might not happen. We intend it to happen. But yes, this is Oscar month, so every movie we cover in March will take home at least one trophy, and this is episode number 648. This podcast spoils the movie in question and perhaps many others, so be aware of that now. I'm the jittery newlywed who doesn't feel welcome in his own home, Ryan Ellis. I never have. And here's the lady who's got monograms on nearly everything she's ever owned, my wife, Bev.
That's me.
They really put it on thick, lay it on thick. She's Rebecca De Winter, RD Dubs. And let's hope all your monograms don't burn up artistically in a fire at the end of your mansion's life. Wasn't her mansion, it was her husband's mansion. I guess at one time it was hers, because she was married. All right, let's establish off the top, by the way, that since Joan Fontaine's character in this book, apparently, you said you read the book, and in this movie, and I think every version of this that's ever been done, she's never given a first name. She's just known as Mrs. De Winter or the second Mrs. De Winter. Let's just call her Joan. So her first name in reality, Joan, for this podcast.
Yeah, the actress's name.
All right, the coming attractions trivia question for Rebecca, which won the Best Picture Oscar, the only time that happened for Hitchcock. I count only 3 other times when a Hitchcock film was even so much as nominated for Best Picture. The results might surprise you, but tell me those results.
The results did surprise me because they were for movies you wouldn't think. If you were like, which movies of Hitchcock's got nominated for Best Picture?
Pretty much none of them you'd say that about.
No, exactly. So Rebecca won. It must have been the same year Foreign Correspondent was also nominated.
It was, yep.
Which is wild, as you think that would split the vote, but no, it worked out for him. Suspicion also got a Best Picture nom, and so did Spellbound.
Yeah, Greg Peck film with, I believe, Ingrid Bergman. I think she's in it, but he's definitely in it.
But not Rear Window, Psycho, North by Northwest, Vertigo. His classic movies didn't even get nominated for Best Picture.
All the nominations, the 4 movies there, came within 5 or 6 years, and 3 of them were in consecutive years. 2 in 1 year here with Rebecca and Foreign Correspondent, and Suspicion was the very next year. That's a Cary Grant movie with Joan Fontaine, I think. That's when she won her Oscar. She didn't win for this movie. That's right. It was the next year. She did win for a Hitchcock film. Spellbound was 1945. But yeah, the big 4 especially, and there's many others. People say, my favorite Hitchcock film is The Birds or Marnie. Okay, fine. But the big 4 that all made the AFI's list, Rear Window, Vertigo, North by Northwest, and Psycho, had something like 13 nominations between them, but nothing for Best Picture, and none of them won anything either. It wasn't like they won cinematography like this did, or the screenplay, or visual effects or something, one of the actors. Nope. Although he was nominated for directing 2 of those, Rear Window and Psycho, but not a Best Picture nomination. Okay, then, Old Becks was released by Selznick International Pictures and United Artists on April 12th, 1940. So this sucker's pretty close to 85 years old. And its ticket sales seemed to be pretty healthy when it came out. But Bev, the movie is older than dirt. So please give us a skinny on the first film Hitchcock made in Hollywood. Another bit of interesting trivia is that he'd been making those English films, The 39 Steps and many others. And then he comes to Hollywood, works with Selznick. Bit of a clash there, those guys, but look at the success they made. So go ahead, the skinny.
Joan Fontaine is a shy young woman swept off her feet by the older, wealthy Maxim de Winter, who marries her and whisks her away to Manderley, his family's famous estate. At Manderley, she's quickly overwhelmed by the grandeur of the house and the specter of Maxim's late first wife, Rebecca, who seems to be everything she's not. Something she's constantly reminded of by Mrs. Danvers, Manderley's stern housekeeper who goes out of her way to make the new Mrs. De Winter feel uncomfortable. The circumstances of Rebecca's death are called into question when her body is discovered, and Maxim must confess that he accidentally killed her, then scuttled her sailboat with her body in it to cover it up. Maxim narrowly avoids prison, and his young bride stays loyal, grateful to learn that he actually hated his first marriage. But Mrs. Danvers burns Manderley down in a rage, going down with it.
Or, in a nutshell, as James Earl Jones said in Field of Dreams, the memories will be so thick, they'll have to brush them away from their faces. Of that line, he's talking about baseball memories. In this case, these people are obsessed. It's not just Mrs. Danvers. She's the worst for it. And, of course, we find out later Maxim is guilt-ridden, really, more than anything else, and still hates her, but probably isn't glad that she died. But even the other servants seem like they're a little bit obsessed, too. Oh, the old Mrs. De Winter, she liked it this way. Why are you assuming she wants something done the way that Rebecca did?
Rebecca was like a charismatic cult leader.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Mrs. Danvers was her most devoted acolyte.
Was she ever? And this movie, I don't think, hides it very well, even though the censors would not have allowed it if it was blatant. And I think it's pretty blatant, actually, that Danvers was sexually attracted to this woman. Look at when she takes her clothes out. Look at this. Was it a fur or something like that? Touches it with her face.
But the nightgown, that's see-through.
Right, there you
the
go.
lace nightgown, and she's running her hands through it and looking directly at Joan, and it's creepy. And then it's creepier still when you learn Mrs. Danvers was her maid from when she was a little girl.
Right.
She helped raise Rebecca. So when you think of why and how Rebecca became the way she was, you can certainly call into question Mrs. Danvers' role in that even.
Right. So I don't think the movie's being very subtle, even though it wasn't 100% obvious, but there's something going on. This woman maybe never did anything about it, but she wanted Rebecca. And it sounds like she maybe should have when it comes to her look, supposedly. But she's never shown, even in a picture. We never see this woman. We have to assume she's the most perfect person of all time. Okay, there's a hell of a lot of numbers here. Let's go through. Rotten Tomatoes, 98% of critics like this film. What a number that is. 103 fresh reviews, only 2 rotten. The average is 8.9 out of 10, and 92% of audiences. The remake in 2020, which I don't remember ever hearing about, but
Netflix.
in looking up this, it's the first thing that shows. Oh, it's on Netflix, okay.
Yeah.
Lily James and Armie Hammer are the 2 stars of that, and it's only at 37%. Shadow of a Doubt is Hitchcock's highest-ranked film, 100%. And then he's a lot of 98s, 97s, that kind of thing. Rear Window and Strangers on a Train are 2 others in addition to this that are at 98%. The Numbers ranks this 5th at the 1940 U.S. box office. Pinocchio was number 1, Fantasia was number 2, and The Philadelphia Story was number 7. We've covered all those films. In fact, Fantasia and Philadelphia Story made the AFI's list. This did not. This is 249th on the IMDb 250, so it's clinging by its fingernails to stay on that list. And it won 2 Oscars. Best Picture, obviously, but also George Barnes's cinematography. He's one of the few people that ever won an Oscar for a Hitchcock film, I think. Well, maybe there's more than I think. He made so many movies, but we just said none of those big 4 won a single trophy. It was also nominated for 9 others. Hitchcock for directing, Joan Fontaine for Best Actress, Laurence Olivier, Sir Laurence Olivier for Best Actor, Judith Anderson for Best Supporting Actress, maybe a little debatable, the Robert Sherwood and Joan Harrison screenplay, Hal Kearns' editing, Franz Waxman's music score, plus also the special effects and the art direction. This is the rare film that won Best Picture, but nothing for directing, writing, or acting. You think about Spotlight, won only 2, but the other one was for writing. Argo won only 3, but one of them was for writing. Coda, same thing, and a supporting actor for that matter with Coda. The Grapes of Wrath won that year for directing, so that was John Ford's, I think, 3rd Oscar, maybe 2nd Oscar. Was it 3rd? Anyway, he won that year, and also that one supporting actress, so that was Danvers' category. Jimmy Stewart won his only Oscar that year instead of Olivier, and Ginger Rogers won instead of Joan Fontaine. Rogers was for Kitty Foyle. That'll come up again later. And Stewart was for Philadelphia Story. How about that? This was inducted into the National Film Registry in 2018. We've covered 10 other movies, so almost half of the 25 now. I can do math. 11 out of 25. Broadcast news, Brokeback Mountain, Cinderella, we just covered that very recently. Hood, Jurassic Park. I love that music from Brokeback. Anyway, Jurassic Park, My Fair Lady, The Navigator, On the Town, Pick Up on South Street, and The Shining. This was 80th on AFI's Top 100 Thrills. Hitchcock had a lot of films on there, including number 1, which was...
It's gotta be Psycho.
It was Psycho. Mrs. Danvers was 31st on AFI's Top 50 Villains list. She's way over the top and it's a little bit too much. It's almost funny, especially the eyes sometimes.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree.
Okay. And it was nominated for a lot more AFI lists. The Top 100 Passions, the Top 100 Quotes, with the first line of the movie. Last night, I dreamt I went to Manderley again. The mystery category in the Top 100 Genres, the Top 25 Music Scores, and then the 98 and 07 AFI Top 100 lists. There's so much there. Your thoughts on Rebecca, which was not your first time seeing it?
It was my first time seeing it.
Oh, it was? Okay. But you read the books. You know a lot about the novel.
When the 2020 movie came out, I was curious about it, and I thought, okay, it's just finally time to get around to reading Rebecca, which I did.
Did you see that movie, though, by the way?
No, I never did. I think it just got terrible reviews, so I thought, I'll just keep it. And I knew there was a Hitchcock version. And
you also heard Armie Hammer was hungry.
Yeah, there's... That was not a small thing that happened, I'm sure, when they were trying to promote that film. Wow, what a way to go down. So as far as the Hitchcock version goes, I like it. It's incredibly evocative. Unfortunately, the changes that the censors made to the end are very frustrating because that one big change that they made, having Rebecca's murder be accidental and Maxim's cover-up just be a bad decision that he made in a panic, that changes everything. It changed the whole tone of the ending. I think the performances are all good. Mrs. Danvers is a difficult villain for me. I know she's like a famous villain, but I find her a little impenetrable. Like, I don't really understand. Fine, you were obsessed with her, but the cruelty is so over the top and irrational. It's almost like you picked the wrong target. If you want to punish somebody, it should be Maxim. You hate men. You say Rebecca hated men. Yeah. Why are you picking on this young woman? Not just picking on her, but homicidally picking on her. Even when I read the book, I didn't totally understand the Mrs. Danvers thing. Seeing the movie didn't really provide that much clarity, and her performance is a little bit campy. Joan Fontaine, to me, is wonderful. I haven't seen the Ginger Rogers movie that you mentioned that she won for, but if there was one of these performances that I would like to see win an award, I think Joan Fontaine is, especially having read the book, and the book is so evocative of her shyness and her anxiety and her trouble with interacting with the world.
Which she already had, and now they make it far worse. All of them are making it far worse.
Yeah. She physically personifies that so well to me. I guess it's risking being over the top, but it's really not. It feels also authentic.
It's important that he would fall for her so quickly and marry her. And she's got to be good-looking enough. Let's face it, she's got to be good-looking. You could say, well, that's not right. Well, it is, in old movies especially. She had to be good-looking enough that he'd want to marry her in a couple of days. He's known her a few days at the most. But she also can't be what Rebecca was. We don't know what that actually was, but let's just picture Halle Berry in her prime or something like that.
Mm-hmm. The charisma, right?
That's also part of it.
And that's where
and
she's
Joan
the
Fontaine,
opposite.
in this movie at least, doesn't have any of those things. She looks very nice. She's a very lovely woman. If you saw her walking down your street and say, there's a great-looking lady, in Hollywood terms, at least in this movie, she's just fine, and that's the point. Look at when she first meets everybody, especially Mrs. Danvers, when she first gets to Manderley. Because it was raining, she looks like a drowned rat. Mm-hmm. And by Joan Fontaine's standards, she doesn't look very good at all. Plus, she's shivering, and she looks like she's smaller than she probably really was. Isn't there at least one shot where Olivier just towers over her? And I looked it up, and I don't think he's that much taller than her. Maybe he was on a box.
Well, the movie's definitely making a point to illustrate the age difference, the class difference, the difference in status between the two. I'm sure even in the 30s, women especially understood that a middle-aged widower marrying a meek orphan half his age, it's a red flag. I'm sure that Daphne du Maurier understood that, and I'm sure every woman who read the book and watched the movie would have been waiting for that shoe to drop, and I think that Hitchcock understood that. He certainly has enjoyed exploring the idea of people murdered by their spouses. He has a keen understanding that danger can be sleeping in bed beside you.
The next movie he made with her, Suspicion, was all about that.
Yes, exactly. Dial M for Murder, or Shadow of a Doubt.
The uncle, but yeah.
Somebody you trust and love could be very dangerous. So I think he must have had that in his mind too. There could be a sequel to the book or the movie Rebecca where Maxim kills her too. Where the story that he tells her about actually Rebecca was evil and she drove me to this terrible act and she lied about being pregnant and she was actually dying and all of those things could be The thing that many people have told their spouse, my ex is crazy. Isn't that a cliche? Oh, you don't understand.
But then you mean
her fault.
he did kill her on purpose, though.
That could be a version of this. I don't think that's what Hitchcock is going for here. I think general interpretation.
I bet you he wanted to.
Maybe you're right.
But the censor said no way.
They had to choose between Maxim gets punished for the crime.
So jail probably.
Or Maxim didn't actually do the crime.
Yeah,
and they said, okay, well, we're going to compromise and say he did the crime, but it was an accident.
When he tells the whole story to her, they don't ever show the fight they had. They're in the room, at least, where it was, so maybe that's visual enough. But we never see the fight because we never see Rebecca. We don't see him take her to the boat and scuttle it and sink it and all that kind of thing. But still, that sequence is so visual.
I know. It's
Olivier's
so
best
cool.
moment for sure. It's a long monologue. She talks here and there.
And the camera just shows the empty space where it would have taken place, inviting us to imagine it because Mrs. De Winter is imagining these things happening, but it's still completely being narrated by Maxim. So if he had decided to have a flashback where they cast someone to play Rebecca and we actually see that happening, well, that's a pretty explicit way of saying to the audience, this really happened. He's telling the truth.
Yeah.
To illustrate it the way that they did, I really, really love that touch because I think it leaves it open up to interpretation.
You're right. Maybe Hitchcock knew that very well, and his writers as well, and they could get it by the censors and still have it be that, maybe he actually did do this, but he's just a very good liar. Now, when we first see him, when she first sees him standing on the cliff, he looks like he's contemplating suicide. When you're new to the movie and the story, you wouldn't know that's what it is, but I think that's what the movie's saying, is he's thinking about, but it's because he's guilt-ridden. Because he didn't love her. Well, maybe he did when he first married her, but what's it, the night they got married? She tells him all these things, and she's in love with her cousin, Jack, the George Saunders character.
Although I don't even think she's in love with him.
She's using him, too.
Mrs. Danvers says she hated all men. She would have her flings with them and then laugh at them behind their back and only loved, I guess, Mrs. Danvers, or that's what Mrs. Danvers thought.
I don't think she loved Mrs. Danvers either, although she uses her name when she goes, at least one of those flings with Jack.
When she sees the doctor, too, doesn't she go?
That's what it is. She calls herself Danvers, right? Mm-hmm. Takes her name. And the Danny, I'm assuming, is not anything to do with the first name. I think it's just, I don't know what her first name would be. Georgette Danvers, so Danny. It doesn't seem like Danvers would have a nickname like Danny, but they all, well, maybe it's only Jack. But he calls her that a lot. It's so familiar as well, and yet she doesn't seem to like him very much. They don't really truly have a connection or a teaming up or anything like that, even though they both are obsessed with this dead woman, who they don't know died the way, let's say that story was true. She fell, hit her head, and then he covered it up, which really should put him in jail regardless, even if he was the most sympathetic person otherwise beyond.
That's a crime. Yeah.
And he is rich. That's probably why he gets away with it. We watched the movie a week ago. I forget. Did they think, that she left or that she committed suicide? Because the body is found in the course of the movie here.
I think the idea is just supposed to be that she drowned accidentally. When he discovers when he identifies the body that's not her.
That's, of course, yes.
They think they found her body. He goes and he identifies some strange woman and says, yes, that's my wife.
That's right. So the case is closed, right?
Yeah. What they do discover when they speak to her doctor, and this is the same in the book and in the movie, is that however those things happened, it sounds like she wanted to die. Suicide by making somebody murder her.
But especially Maxim, so that he pays the price by going to jail.
It's kind of like a Gone Girl thing, or she's Amy Dunn and she almost succeeds.
Right.
And she actually dies because she had terminal cancer, and she had no intention of dying of cancer.
And no pregnancy.
I think the idea is that she thought she was pregnant with Jack's baby.
Right.
When she went to the doctor in the book, it's an abortionist. She's going to get an abortion, and she discovers cancer. And in the movie, she's just going to get an examination and discovers cancer, that she was never pregnant. All the symptoms of pregnancy are just that she had a uterine cancer, I think.
Okay. So when Joan sees Maxim at the start of the movie, do you think that he is thinking about killing himself? And is it just because of guilt?
That's a good question.
You don't stand like that looking the way he does. Look how mad he is when she interrupts him. She's saying, well, are you okay up there? Mm-hmm. But rather than in any way be polite about that, like most English people would be, it's, leave me alone.
Well, he's gotten away from Manderley because he wants to forget everything. And the idea is that he hasn't really been back since Rebecca died.
Yeah, he goes back with his new wife.
Yeah, I know. But he can't escape the memories and the guilt. And maybe it's true. Maybe she saved his life. And in doing so, he just attached hope and optimism to her. And that's why the whirlwind romance. He's always repeating, your innocence. I never want to corrupt this. And it's so beautiful that you're young. And she has this ominous line when they're in their courtship. Wouldn't you rather be with somebody your own age or somebody experienced? She makes some reference to being 36 years old. And he laughs and he says, oh, you'll never be 36.
Right.
What a weird, ominous thing to say. 36 isn't actually that old. It's younger than his age. He's 42.
Why would he say that? That's a good question. It's not like he's in league with Danvers and why would he anyway? Why would
I don't think
find somebody who's to kill her?
Oh, you'll never be old. Being old is bad if you're a woman only, because he's 42. I think the idea is supposed to be, no, you're just so fresh and young.
That's maybe what it is.
I think that's what he means. But still, the line is intentional. The screenwriter put it in there and worded it that way so that it would be that kind of ominous threat. I really do think Hitchcock wants us to wonder if this man is going to kill her next.
If it was a bona fide horror movie, that would make some sense. Maybe he and Danvers are in league, and he's got to recruit some woman, make her feel sorry for me, then I'll wow her with my money and my class and my looks. She'll marry me, and then we'll mess her up too. But that's not where it's going. I'm just saying that's where a horror movie could be. And of course, Hitchcock made thrillers, but sometimes they were pretty close to horror movies. Psycho's a horror movie anyway.
And I guess the idea is, as soon as they get back to Manderley, he is once again overwhelmed with memories of the tragedy of what happened to Rebecca and everything that happened around that. Whatever solace she gave him when they were on vacation suddenly doesn't seem to work for him anymore. And I'm not sure if he legitimately loses interest or what's going on. It's never...
He's so absent.
He's so absent. In the book, it's even more... He literally leaves, keeps going away on business, and just abandons her, throws her to the wolves. She has no idea what to do there.
There's a big part of the movie where Danvers is in the movie way more than he is. The middle section, mostly, where he almost disappeared. Well, he's in some scenes, but it really is Fontaine mostly on her own, which is the point of the story, I know. But for such a big name like Olivier, he doesn't have as much screen time as you might think.
She's the explicit villain. But he never should have left her alone with her in the first place. Why isn't he there? Why isn't he sticking up for her? Why didn't he prepare her for what it would take to run a household? A lot of this movie is about their class difference. The 20th century saw a decline in families like the De Winters. We talked about this when we covered Remains of the Day. You have these huge, expensive estates and all the privileges that come with British aristocracy. But it changed after the First World War. It was the end of an era. They were in decline. That's part of what the book is about in the movie. The implication is pretty strong that his wealth, his status, his connections are what keep him out of prison. He's obviously very friendly with the inspector, and the whole town really respects him. His home is literally a tourist attraction. They say it's open to the public on Wednesdays or something. And it's in everyone's interest to just accept his version of events and move on and keep his reputation intact.
And look how much money he's going to have now that this thing burned down, assuming he has insurance on Manderley.
Yeah. He's
not going to rebuild it. Why would he? He doesn't want to go back there now. Yeah, it's gone, and so is Danvers, and Rebecca already was gone. But
and as we've learned,
he's not going to go back there.
A lot of these estates were actually boondoggles. They cost the family so much money to maintain that they would be a bigger burden than something that they could genuinely enjoy. Because, what's Maxim doing to make money? He's just a rich guy.
Well, I'm saying he's really rich, but maybe that's a show. Maybe he's got so much credit because you're going to say, oh, yeah, we'll take Maxim to winter in this posh hotel or this nice restaurant, and he'll pay later. However they even do that stuff. In some cases, they don't even pay because you want the big name person to be at our place. Like that scene in Bowfinger, which I watched on my birthday, where he goes to a clothing store, Eddie Murphy does, and he's trying on, well, he's got a guy trying on clothes, actually, and putting a Eddie Murphy face in front of him to see what he looks. And then the guy says, if you come back on Friday, we'll give you all these clothes for free, but you just endorse them. Yeah, I'll do that, but I need $1,000 too. And that's a bit of a joke, but I can believe that would actually be something a celebrity would do. Look at Paris Hilton. She got as famous as she did beyond her own last name because she would go to a place, a club or something like that, and be paid to do it.
Yeah.
And she gets a great night out in the town, and somebody else is paying for all of it. Mm-hmm. I don't really like her very much, but I guess I got to tip my hat for that, to have a life like that. And maybe the same thing with Maxim. Maybe this is all a show. And yes, if he sold Manderley, which maybe he should have just done in the first place, he could have made so much money and then he wouldn't have money troubles. We're inventing this. Maybe that's not even true, but it does make me wonder.
And maybe the whole story is a bit of a metaphor for the decline of a certain kind of wealth, a certain kind of family and the British aristocracy. So you have a family that we learn, everybody loves and respects him and thinks Manderley is so beautiful, but we learn that there's true rot on the inside, that the staff is cruel and he's a murderer. Rebecca was Rebecca.
In the movie, he's not a murderer. In the movie, he's a cover-up artist.
He commits involuntary manslaughter and then gets rid of the body. But he's not an innocent man either. And you're really called to question the way he treats his young wife.
No.
She's not working class, but she's middle class. Why would he marry somebody like her?
She's so the opposite of Rebecca in every way by the looks of it.
Yeah. Rebecca's power, her strength, the reason that she could manipulate him was because she probably had money of her own. She certainly had lots of family connections, and she knew exactly what she was doing in that world. She knew how to manipulate it and control it. The new Mrs. De Winter comes in and has none of those things. She's completely naive and innocent. She's never going to have the upper hand over him, and maybe that's part of the appeal as well.
And if somebody just told her, you can manipulate this guy because it happened before, and here's how to do it, I don't think she would.
No.
She's a good person. And if you gave her that opportunity, like somebody says, oh my God, if I could only get away with something, I would steal a lot of money, hurt somebody, do something worse. Well, if somebody said to me, here's a wallet, they'll never find out, take it, I still wouldn't want it. It's not mine. I'd feel like a thief even if I knew I'd get away with it.
She's a good person, genuinely a good person. When the movie starts, I think I said to you, it's funny that we're covering this directly after covering Cinderella, because this is a movie about what happens to Cinderella after the wedding.
Right.
Somebody refers to as Cinderella at one point.
Jack calls her.
Yeah. That. Okay, there you go. And the first act is the romance and the marriage, and the rest of the film is this bleak reality of her leaving everything she knew to be the mistress of this great house.
Live in a castle.
That she doesn't have the skills for. Yeah, it is a castle. Prince Charming is distant and cold. And if she doesn't figure out how to become essential to him, she may lose everything. And then what will she have? Then she'll be a divorcee with nothing. They say her parents are gone.
Mrs. Van Hopper has been her, what do you call it?
Paid companion, yeah. So she needs somebody to just, I guess, spend time with her on her vacation.
Now, the movie by no means gets into this, but we already know and we agree that Danvers and Rebecca, at least from Danvers' end, there was something that was going on or that she wanted to go on. I'm not saying the movie is saying this part, but a paid companion.
Mrs. Van Hopper
is Joan
was
doing
really,
things
but she was working for the money.
Like in The Favorite.
I don't think so.
No, I don't think. I just thought of it right now. But
in the end, the palace is gone. Maxim and Mrs. De Winter effectively go on the run. They have to leave England. I think in the book they end up in Egypt or something. So they really leave everything behind. She's happy because she thinks that Maxim loves her, but nobody
does he?
Watches this movie and thinks
he ever really did.
He really loves her.
He wanted to, maybe. Well, what is with that line that opens the movie and it was nominated for the quotes list? I dreamt I went to Manderley again. Does the book explain that better than I think the movie does? Why would she dream about that? She didn't want to be there.
It's a really beautifully written book. Great momentum with the prose, and it's entertaining and beautiful. But I remember finishing the book being like, I don't understand why Mrs. Danvers was the way she was, or what this book is really trying to tell me. And maybe I'm just not coming to it from somebody reading it in 1938 when it was published. So maybe there's cultural references or references that are English that completely go over my head. I wondered the same thing. Last night I dreamed of Manderley. Manderley is what really seduces her. She admits to him, when I was a girl, I saw the house and I have a postcard of it. I bought a postcard.
Oh, okay.
The house is famous and it is a fantasy for her. She really is the Cinderella character. We talked about this in Nora. In Nora, she's a prostitute who marries a billionaire.
The son of a billionaire.
Son of a billionaire, yeah. And it doesn't go well for her. And I think it's the same sort of thing. This fantasy is built on toothpicks. There's just nothing there. It's a house of cards.
So that quote, I guess I have this wrong. I interpret it to mean that the rare voiceover is at the beginning. I don't know if there's ever a voiceover again. It's not often, anyway. It's one of those kinds of movies like Dirty Dancing that has a voiceover, and then if it's ever again, I don't think it's Dirty Dancing. It doesn't happen again. Anyway, she says that line. I thought that was supposed to be a flashback type thing, and she's dreaming about a place that doesn't even exist anymore because it burned down. But you're saying that this is the little girl fantasizing about going to this place when she didn't even know who the people were at the time.
That's what she thought she was getting. She says, I dreamed of Manderley again, and it is just a dream. It was always a facade. Why is she still thinking of Manderley? If she's happy with her marriage, why does she care about the house? She should just care about Maxim. She should care about their future. If that's who she loved and that's who she wanted to be with, what is it about that house that's still haunting her? Her whole experience there was pretty rotten.
There were some effects that were dated, understandably. It's 85 years ago. But otherwise, the art direction, set decoration, so the sets and the visual effects, matte paintings, that kind of stuff, in this entire movie are pretty impressive.
And those were miniatures. They built miniatures of Manderley. When the camera's rolling up the path and coming up to Manderley in the dream sequence, you can kind of tell that's a miniature, although I think that makes it even more dreamlike.
Looks surreal.
Doesn't look quite real that there's this artist rendering and it's supposed to be in her imagination. But yeah, they had several miniatures and God, yeah, the house is so beautiful. Still, the way it's shot, everything about it feels really oppressive and claustrophobic too.
And even his sister and her husband, who are, I guess you could say comic relief. They're a little bit funny. We didn't laugh at them, but they're maybe supposed to be funny. They're not that bad, and the sister actually tries to be helpful. What are their names again?
Oh.
He's Major Giles Lacey. She's Beatrice Lacey, so B, Gladys Cooper. She's not nearly as bad as everybody who works there is. She's more helpful, but even she's a little bit not friendly to her. I guess no one is, and I guess Hitchcock said to Joan Fontaine, no one likes your hair. They don't want your hair. And apparently that was true about Olivier, but he was trying to manipulate her with her performance. So she would actually feel like she's isolated from the cast. So many movies we've seen over the years where two people play people that hate each other, and then you might see a making of, or you'll hear about it later on. They were best friends when the camera wasn't rolling. But in this one, she was method acting by the sounds of it. She was new to filmmaking. She was 22.
That's great casting then, because she's described as in her early 20s.
Mm-hmm. And of course, her sister Olivia de Havilland had just been in, well, many things. Gone with the Wind was the year before, but then before that it was The Adventures of Robin Hood. So she'd been in probably several big movies, but those two right in a row. They were sisters, but they were not friendly. And I think it was the next year when they competed for Best Actress.
Wow.
By the way, just to acknowledge something to the audience here, we just had our mic drop out, so if it sounds different, we've had to make a few minor adjustments, but we'll try to carry on and hopefully it doesn't stop itself again. It just randomly stopped. What were we talking about? Oh, Danvers, when she clearly makes herself the villain to Joan and to us, is when she tells her, yes, dress in this outfit that was an ancestor of Maxim's. Rebecca dresses that same person at some point, and when Maxim sees this outfit, he loses it. So he's upset, and he's not very nice sometimes. He obviously has a temper. She should be worried about her future with this guy because he could get violent with her. And also, Danvers really proves herself to be a jerk in that moment, to put it nicely, to have set her up like that, because she clearly is setting her up. This isn't accidental. It's malicious.
Yeah, and then it's not long after that she finds her, is it the West Wing, where
Rebecca's
quarters were, and she has the long speech where she talks about all of her clothes. She has this beautiful room that nobody's allowed to go into, and then she invites the new Mrs. Danvers to jump off the balcony and kill herself.
It would be so easy. Why don't you?
It's so evil.
That's the red letter scene in this movie, or certainly for Judith. We've cut it out. I've tried to say Judith Anderson so many times.
There, you just said it.
Do it? Judith Anderson.
Judith Anderson.
The red letter scene in this movie, I think, for most people, and I think it's what was shown when they did the thrills list, was that clip of, just go ahead, kill yourself. I don't know if she says literally kill yourself, but that's obviously what she means.
What's your take on Mrs. Danvers as a villain?
It's okay that she's in love with her boss. That's not the end of the world that you are. You're sexually attracted to a woman when you are a woman. That's something that was more scandalized back in these days, I guess, but I don't care. I never cared about that. It's also 2025 Ryan saying that. If I was around in these times and acted like these people and was rich, I'd probably judge it badly too. But that's also a subtext. Text-wise, she's awful, obviously. She's a terrible person. Why are you treating your boss like this? Why are any of them treating their boss like this? She's the worst for it, but most of them are, well, I guess that's the way they are anyway, maybe. But she's new to this, but she's also in charge of you. She could fire you. This is your job. You don't tell your boss to kill themselves or even just the things that they all tell her to do.
And if you love the house and you love Rebecca and all of her many things that are festooned about.
Why would you risk leaving that, having to leave that?
But I guess she knows that if there's a new wife here, eventually those things are going to get sent up to the attic and that Rebecca's memory will start to fade away, which is inevitable anyway. I think also she must hate Maxim.
Oh, clearly. Wait, you mean Danvers?
Danvers,
definitely.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Because like Rebecca, I think she hates all men. Why else would you mention that? Oh, we would laugh at these men. And she must be pretty angry with Maxim for replacing Rebecca. She's a hateful person. She's trapped in her station. But she at least got to express that anger vicariously through Rebecca's antics. Rebecca would go and do these terrible things and then come back to her and they would laugh about it. So when she's gone, Mrs. Danvers' outlet was also gone. So it all came out in the most destructive manner possible. First, trying to destroy this young woman's life, and then finally, when that blows up in her face, and realizing maybe that Rebecca's going to get outed as a terrible person, that's a possibility, too, that people will discover just who she was.
Do you think Danvers would think of her as a terrible person, though? Is she that self-aware?
No, I don't think she would, but she would want to protect her legacy. She's terrible, too, so, well, I don't want people to think of that. So, in this fit of rage, she burns down the house. Destroy something that Maxim loves, although maybe he's free now if Manderley is gone.
It's funny, by the way, I'm looking at my notes about how Rebecca was with Jack in the cottage and obviously having sex. I'm a little bit surprised that the censors allowed this movie to even make that clear, that they had extramarital sex, and he's her cousin.
And they grew up together as children. There's like a lot of weird perversions happening in this movie. You have Mrs. Danvers who raised Rebecca, sexually obsessed with her. That's pretty demented. And then you have this couple having an affair who grew up together as children, as cousins. When I talk about the rot going on behind closed doors at Manderley, this is pretty much as dark as it gets.
Yeah, Rebecca could cheat with probably any guy, but she chose him. And it's not like George Saunders was the pretty boy of Hollywood at that point. Laurence Olivier is better looking than he is.
Oh, Laurence Olivier is gorgeous in this movie. Oh, my God.
And I said he wasn't very nice to Joan Fontaine in this, and I guess that's because he wanted Vivien Leigh. Maybe they'd been married by this point, but they were together at least, and he wanted her for this role. But I don't know, was she too old? She was maybe too established, too. She was coming off the biggest movie of all time the year before, so that maybe doesn't make sense. Maybe Hitchcock wanted, I don't know if she was unknown, but a lesser known anyway.
Yeah, maybe they couldn't afford her, or...
Could have been that.
You need somebody that the audience is going to take for a mouse. After Gone with the Wind, is anybody going to look at Vivien Leigh and think, oh, this poor pathetic creature?
The whole point of that story is that she's going to raise herself up and she's going to help herself. She had a lot of help along the way. She was a rich kid with slaves, but still, she's somebody that doesn't let herself get down even when things have gone to hell in her life.
I mean, she's a force of nature in that movie, so for her to turn around and then be somebody this pathetic, it could be a stretch for the audience, you know?
So in the end, they do agree publicly that it was a suicide, even though that's not, of course, what actually happened. And then, in a way, that's what Danvers does, too. Yeah, I just realized that. So publicly, her boss committed suicide, which wasn't true, but publicly it's true. And then Danvers, that would be very public, burned this place down and didn't get out. Everyone else got out, but she didn't. So she committed suicide, too. What about that last shot? I think it was Hitchcock's idea to have the flaming pillow, which also Danvers said she embroidered for her, right? The flames are licking that pillow and then credits.
I heard it was a compromise. They wanted the flames to...
Selznick wanted the flames to create a giant R, which is a little stupid.
That's so stupid. They lay on the monogram stuff so thick.
Selznick was a talented producer, but he wasn't always right. But he had so many opinions. He's known as Mr. Memo. He would write memos that were long to everybody he ever worked with and just bore the hell out of them. And I guess most of them had to do what he wanted.
Yeah.
It was tougher with Hitchcock because even then he was pretty powerful.
A famous micromanager, producer working with Hitchcock, they basically called it in-camera editing. He didn't shoot anything that he didn't want in the final cut of the film. There's no coverage. You don't just do the whole scene in close-up on each actor. No. You shoot the close-ups that you want to end up in the movie and nothing else.
So Selznick can't edit, and that's what he was doing, certainly with Gone with the Wind, but other productions. He was the director in post-production, which was pretty common. It wasn't just Selznick that did that.
Yeah.
Studios didn't let even John Ford edit his own films. When he was done shooting, maybe not literally, but he was pretty much done with production. You look at it now, look how many people are their own editors, but at the very least, they're in the edit suite with the editor or editors. Okay, then, so the cast is a pretty big one here. Joan Fontaine won the Oscar the next year for Suspicion and made many prestigious movies, but this is the first time we've ever covered one of her films. We saw Suspicion a year or two ago. Did you remember liking it?
Yeah, I really liked it.
And they also copped out with that ending. I won't give it away what happens, but it's a movie that sets something up and then doesn't really pay it off. Olivier, we've covered, I guess it's 4 times now. So he was in Wuthering Heights, an AFI movie. Spartacus, that was 2. And Marathon Man, where he got an Oscar nomination, one of the great villains of all time. The Nazi dentist. And he won his Oscar 8 years later for Hamlet. That was a Best Picture winner, but he won his Oscar for acting in that. He won some, maybe even 2 honorary awards, though, as well. Judith Anderson was in Laura a couple years after this. There's a pretty great thriller as well. Cat in a Hot Tin Roof and 10 Commandments. And then she's the Vulcan High Priestess in Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. And like many great movie villains, although she does have her faults in this, she never blinks, or rarely blinks. She reminds me a lot of Norma Desmond in Sunset Boulevard.
Yeah.
But the difference is that she has got such a huge amount of screen time, and she's really the main character. Well, I guess Holden, but she's the co-lead, and she's in the movie pretty much as he is. And we know her motivations, and yeah, Swanson takes it over the top sometimes, but that person is over the top. She also is an actress in the movie. So it is a little bit more acceptable for her to be the way she is. And at the end, as Wilder said, she's gone Meshuggah. So of course she's going to be, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up when she's being taken off to jail.
And she was a star of the silent era, so those big expressions...
In reality and in the character,
yeah.
So you can forgive a lot of those things. But she does remind me, Danvers does remind me quite a bit of Norma Desmond. George Saunders, I always heard Saunders, even though it's spelled Sanders. He was in The Picture of Dorian Gray, which I covered, I think it was last year. And of course, he won the Oscar for All About Eve. We played a villainous-type character in that, too. Very caustic guy, great dialogue. Best man role in that whole film. The other 2 guys are pretty boring. He's got maybe the best role in the whole movie, period, actually. Well, Bette Davis does, but He's really good. And he also made other movies with Hitchcock, by the way, in the 40s, I think, specifically. Reginald Denny, who is Frank Crawley, the lawyer friend, he was in Cat Ballou, which I covered quite a few years ago, and he went on to be in another Best Picture winner, Around the World in 80 Days. Nigel Bruce, who is Major Giles Lacey, I guess the brother-in-law of Maxim, or Max. He played Watson in many Sherlock Holmes films in this era. He also was in Suspicion the next year with Joan Fontaine for Hitchcock. His wife, Gladys Cooper, in this, who's Beatrice. She was in The Bishop's Wife, we covered that, and My Fair Lady, where she plays, I believe, Rex Harrison's mother. And she was in Kitty Foyle, which I told you was the Ginger Rogers Oscar winner, the same year as this. Florence Bates does play the over-the-top Mrs. Van Hopper. She was in On the Town, which I covered, I think it was last year, and she was in Kitty Foyle. See Aubrey Smith, he's the investigator, the older dude. I thought for sure we'd covered him before, because I know that face. I feel like I've seen that face in many films, and I guess I have, but we've never actually talked about one of his movies before. He was in And Then There Were None. One of my favorite books ever read was what was called 10 Little Indians, but it became And Then There Were None. Even then, they don't want to call it Indians in a Hollywood movie. And he was in the 1949 Little Women. And the last guy I'll mention is Leo G. Carroll, who was in a few other Hitchcocks, I believe. Yeah, Strangers on a Train, he was in that, and North by Northwest, but also Wuthering Heights with Olivier. Father of the Bride, we just covered that recently. He's the snooty guy, oh, your house isn't good enough, not enough space in here. And he was in The Bad and the Beautiful. And that's an interesting tie because apparently Kirk Douglas's character was based, at least partly, on Selznick.
Yes.
So Hitchcock we've covered now 10 times. Shadow of a Doubt, apparently his favorite of his own movies and one of my favorites of his films. Notorious, that's also on my short list. Strangers on a Train, Dial M for Murder, Rear Window, number one for me of all of his films, Vertigo, North by Northwest, Psycho, and The Birds. The writers were Robert Sherwood and Joan Harrison. He wrote, and won an Oscar, in fact, for The Best Years of Our Lives, and then she worked with Hitchcock quite a bit. She was his secretary, apparently, and got a writing credit, though. But Michael Hogan, apparently, was a very important behind-the-scenes guy. He was uncredited, I think it was. But Hitchcock and Alma Revel, his wife, had a hand in the screenplay, too, and I think they always did. They just didn't take actual screenplay credit. It was based on Daphne du Maurier's, on screen it says this, celebrated 1938 novel, and she wrote The Birds, which Hitchcock went on to do 23 years later. Selznick produced it, did, of course, Gone with the Wind the year before that. He was an executive producer on the 1933 King Kong, which we covered many years ago, and he was uncredited on The Third Man. I think maybe by then his star was waning and people didn't want to put up with another memo from Dave. I think even at that point he wasn't such the big man anymore. So he was the inspiration for Douglas, at least part of it, in The Bad and the Beautiful, but also the bad guy in Rear Window is based on his look. The guy who's the killer of his own wife. Movies 1 through 3 to 1, we watched the black and white print on our DVD. We started it on YouTube, and I thought, this looks pretty bad, even though it said it was 1080p. Put the DVD in, that wasn't that much better. Neither looked very good. George Barnes shot it, won the Oscar for it. A lot of deep focus cinematography. It was a beautiful looking movie, so he was worthy of the award. He shot Meet John Doe, which I covered only a couple months ago, and The Greatest Show on Earth, which also won Best Picture 12 years later. Hal Kern was the supervising film editor, but he was nominated for the editing Oscar. He also cut Gone with the Wind, so clearly Selznick brought him into this. And he did several with both Hitchcock and Selznick in the future. And then Franz Waxman, one of the all-time classic composers, he composed music for 7 movies we've covered, including To Have and Have Not, Sunset Boulevard, and A Place in the Sun, and he won Oscars for those last 2. They were back-to-back years, in fact. So what'd you think of the cutting, the music? And music's too much. I know you're going to say that.
Yeah, but technically this movie is just perfect. It's immaculate.
Well, I thought
it's such a beautiful looking
some of the visual effects were a little bit stupid.
Oh, yes. The fact that he was so in love with shooting in the studio definitely hurt him here. Some outdoor shots were clearly shot on rear projection. Sir, just leave the house. What do you want? We had just watched Wicked, and I was so turned off by how studio-ish that movie was and how it felt just so much like it was in a green screen. The whole movie just looked so green screen and it was so phony, and that really bothered me. And I was like, oh, this is like the 1940 version of the way Marvel makes all their movies now. Not just Marvel. A lot of studios do this, and it's lazy and it's cheap and it looks bad.
But generally speaking, Barnes's defocus photography was pretty great.
When I think of the stuff that's shot inside the house, and there's like so much beauty in this movie.
And it was the year before Greg Toland shot Citizen Kane for Wells with that deep focus photography, the most famous version of it. But it was in other movies, including this, obviously. I think it was in one of John Ford's Westerns, maybe Stagecoach, which I know Wells thought very highly of.
It was a technological advancement because faster film was being made. You get that deep focus only if you can have like shorter exposure times.
And a lot of light.
Yeah, exactly. So film was being developed that could just
If they had to be black and white. I think they're all black and white films we just mentioned.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Probably.
What happens next? Well, I assume they won't rebuild Manderley. Maxim won't let them, I don't think. The only person who really wanted to be there anyway was Danvers. Everyone else got out of there. Maybe they liked being there, but she was obsessed with it. And she just swallowed a flaming support beam, so she's done. But if he had insurance, he's going to be even richer, so he can buy or build a place even better than this. It was right on the water. That's where Rebecca was. She was in the water, her dead body down there. Oh, she drowned. Well, no, actually, she didn't drown, but that was quite a ways down there. Some boat ran aground, and that's how they found the other boat. Well, how deep is that? So they're right on the ocean, I guess. But a new place, if he does build one, won't have evidence of his awful dead wife all over the place. Although, yes, Joan better watch her back, because Max is a guy who's capable of serious violence against his spouse. He proved it. Even if he didn't actually kill her, he could have, and I think wanted to.
Especially around her 35th birthday.
Right. Will not be 36.
So between her 35th and 36th, yeah.
All right, then last thoughts on the last movie you're going to cover for a while, but the first one in Oscar month, the Best Picture winning Rebecca.
Yeah, it's a shame Hitchcock had to compromise the original material for the censors. It really takes a lot of the edge of the story, but it's so beautifully made. The performances are amazing. It's so evocative. But like I said, something about the story frustrates me, and maybe that's the mystery that remains, and that's why it remained compelling generations later.
Okay. It's a pretty good thriller, but it's nowhere near Hitchcock's best. That's partly because his list of great films is so long that it's hard for anything to break into it. I can name my 5 favorite Hitchcocks and leave out 5 other really good ones, and that would be including this. And we should have talked about this before, but I'll bring this up here at the end. Just like Hitchcock's Vertigo, this is a movie about a woman in anguish, and the man she loves is making it worse. Mm-hmm. And you could argue that in both cases they somewhat are intending to, not like Rebecca would have, but they aren't entirely innocent of it. They're not unaware entirely in either case. And I know Hitchcock tortured Tippi Hedren in The Birds and probably in Marnie. Plus, he seemed to have a contempt for actors in general, men and women. But I think there was some level of empathy with him as well. Because let's not forget that his beloved wife, Alma, worked with him on all of his projects, and it's doubtful she would have enjoyed torturing the characters or the actresses themselves. So is it possible that a Hitchcock movie where a woman is being abused or ignored or just treated badly, like this, like Vertigo, Suspicion, I think that's similar too, is a case of him feeling for her, not enjoying that she's going through that the way people have accused him. And Brian De Palma, I think, fits in this as well, the one who's accused of imitating Hitchcock all the time. I think he dies for some of the women that really get treated badly in some of his movies too. And I'm saying that maybe that's possible with Hitchcock.
Well, I'm always the first to say that depiction of misogyny or racism is not condoning misogyny or
Except
racism.
Hitchcock did bad things to at least Tippi Hedren, so that's why...
Yeah, I mean... And I don't know anything about his wife, what she loved or what drove her. He never gave her credit. There's layers. There's multitudes.
Maybe she hated...
probably people who've written dissertations on this very topic.
Yeah. Maybe she hated women, too. I don't know that it's fair to say he hated women, though, because some of his best movies, they're the main... Well, Kim Novak's not the main player in Vertigo, but it was Roger Ebert that said that in a review, and I think I started liking Vertigo a lot more when I looked at it through those eyes. Maybe the director's actually on her side, even though, yes, he's manipulating her. I said that behind the scenes. No one likes you very much,
He spent the whole second half of the movie in Vertigo. He's punishing her for the whole second half of the film.
But then again, she's involved
bizarrely cool.
in a murder cover-up, though, too. And she manipulated and deceived this guy that she says she loves. So many people will say Hitchcock was terrible, and obviously with at least Hedren he was, but they are his characters. You'd think he would care about his characters, even if he didn't like his characters very much. So that was how we saw Rebecca. If all goes well, you'll be hearing from us again later today. We've been doing Oscars post-view shows since Green Book won the Best Picture Oscar, because we had to talk about that day, or the next day. So we probably will do a show again this year, but beyond that, Bev isn't going to be available to do regular recordings for a while, so that one might not happen either. Even if it does, she'll likely be resting in bed, so the sound quality might not be too snazzy. We'll be in the bedroom. But yeah, starting on March the 10th, so next week, Bev will be absent from the podcast for at least 3 weeks, I'm guessing, maybe more. She goes under the knife and has her second foot surgery in the past year. This time the right foot gets a cutting. Since she'll be unable to watch movies for the podcast or record them for a while, I'll do solo shows for most of, or maybe all of the rest of March, so Oscar month. Our schedule in the next while is this then. So on Friday, this coming Friday, I'll be reviewing something I was going to do last year, but I get to it now instead. The 1949 Best Picture winner, All the King's Men. As for next Monday, I'll be rambling on about my second consecutive King movie, The King's Speech, which you're not a big fan of, right? So you don't care that I'm doing this without you?
I don't care. That's correct, sir.
And since we don't do coming attractions trivia questions leading into my solo shows, just go ahead and tell them all about us, Bev.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to favorite or subscribe. There are hundreds of episodes available for you to check out. And if you like us and you'd like to support us, please leave us a rating and a review. That's a great way to support the podcast. Another way to support us, and a great small Canadian business that we genuinely use and love, is by going to sparkplug.coffee/HYES for freshly roasted premium coffee delivered straight to you. And that HYES will get you started with a 20% discount. You can also find us on YouTube. Our channel is at HYES Ellis. And we'd love to hear from you guys. There's a few ways to find us, starting with Twitter. I'm at Bev Ellis Ellis. And Ryan is at MovieFiend51. You can also find us on Blue Sky. I'm Bev Ellis Ellis there as well, and Ryan goes by Ryan-Ellis. You can also email us. Our address is haveyoueverseenpodcast@gmail.com.
I have no great house to dream about, whether I saw it or lived there or it burned down. I have no dreams at all right now. Just going to be nice and calm and relaxed.
And cut.